By the time the snow started falling over Edmonton, Nathalie was already gone. She hadn't packed much. A bag for the baby, one for herself, the folder she had kept locked in the bottom drawer of her desk for the past 11 months. She didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say that the silence couldn't say better. Nathalie Beaumont-Cross had grown up in a small house in St. Boniface, the kind of house where the pipes knocked every winter, and the kitchen always smelled like something warm. Her mother, a retired schoolteacher, had raised her alone after her father moved west when Nathalie was 9. She'd learned early that if something needed doing, you did it yourself. You didn't wait to be asked, you didn't wait to be thanked, you just did it and moved on. She met Elliot Harding at a university mixer in her second year at the University of Alberta. He was studying business, loud in rooms, good at making people feel like they were the only person he saw. She was studying accounting and architecture in a double major that her advisor called ambitious, in a tone that meant he wasn't sure she'd finish. She finished, she graduated with distinction, and somewhere between her second year and her convocation, she had also fallen completely in love with Elliot. He had a charm that worked like weather. You didn't notice it coming until it had already changed the temperature of the room. He told stories that made people lean in. He remembered details about people's lives that made them feel seen. He had a vision for a real estate development company that he could describe at dinner in a way that made everyone at the table want to invest. The problem, which Nathalie would not fully understand for another decade, was that charm and vision are not the same as execution. And Elliot Harding, for all his gifts, had never once in his life done the part that actually made things work. That part was always Nathalie. They married young, 26 and 24, at a small ceremony in her mother's backyard in Winnipeg. It rained in the morning and cleared by the afternoon, and Nathalie remembered thinking that was a good sign. Their first apartment was a one-bedroom in a walk-up off Jasper Avenue. She was working at a mid-size accounting firm downtown. He was trying to get Harding Development off the ground, which mostly meant networking dinners she paid for, and pitch meetings she helped him prepare for. She would sit across from him at their kitchen table at 11 at night, his pitch deck open on the laptop between them, and she would ask the hard questions before the investors could. What's your cap rate on the first property? What's your exit strategy if the market shifts? What's your contingency if the construction timeline runs long? He would get frustrated sometimes, the way creative people get frustrated when you ask them to put numbers to something they can only see in pictures. But the next morning he would take her notes and walk into those meetings and come out with term sheets. The first deal closed when she was 28. The second and third followed within a year. By the time she turned 30, Harding Development had a small team, a reputation for delivering on time, and a name that was starting to circulate in the right circles. Elliot gave interviews to local business papers. He thanked his investors. He talked about his vision, his instincts, his work ethic. He did not mention Nathalie. She told herself it didn't matter. She was not the kind of woman who needed credit. She had her own career, her own salary, her own projects. She was the steady hand behind the thing that was growing. That was enough, or she told herself it was. The shifts were gradual, the way most important things are. A comment here, a canceled dinner there. Elliot started traveling more. Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary. And when he came back, he brought a new energy that felt at first like confidence. He spoke differently about the company, used words like vision and legacy and brand in ways that suggested he had recently been around people who used those words a lot. He started talking about scaling, about their profile, about image. He hired a marketing director named Corinne. Corinne was 29, sharp, and had worked for a boutique development firm in Vancouver that had recently been featured in Toronto Life. She had opinions about everything. The company logo, the website, the way Elliot should present himself at industry events. She had a portfolio of glossy projects, and a way of talking about aesthetics that made Elliot look at the company he had built, the company Nathalie had helped him build, and see something that needed to be elevated. Nathalie noticed the change the way you notice the season changing. Not all at once, but one day you look up and everything is different from what it was. She was 7 months pregnant when she attended the gala dinner of the Edmonton Real Estate Association. It was the biggest event the company had been invited to. A table for 8 white linens, a keynote from a developer out of Montreal who had just finished the most ambitious mixed-use project in the country. Elliot sat at the center of their table. Corinne sat beside him. Nathalie sat at the end, near the window, and spent most of the evening answering questions about how she was feeling and whether they had chosen a name. At one point, the keynote speaker stopped by their table to say hello to Elliot. He shook hands around the group. When he got to Nathalie, he paused. "And this must be your wife," he said to Elliot warmly. "You must be very proud of what he's built." Nathalie smiled. She said that she was. Elliot did not correct him, did not say, "She built it with me," did not say, "She built most of it before me." He just put his hand briefly on her shoulder, the way you put your hand on something that is beside you rather than beside you, and moved the conversation on. She looked down at her hands on the white tablecloth. The baby moved. She said nothing. Their daughter, Rosalie, was born in late January, during a cold snap that dropped Edmonton to -34 with the wind chill. Nathalie labored for 11 hours. Elliot was there for most of it, though he stepped out twice to take calls that he said couldn't wait. She didn't ask what they were about. When Rosalie was 2 days old, a woman from Elliot's office arrived at the hospital. She introduced herself as someone from legal, which was unusual enough that Nathalie, foggy with exhaustion and still in a hospital gown, sat up slightly to pay attention. The woman placed a document on the tray table beside the bed. She said it was a restructuring of the company's shareholder agreements. She said it needed Nathalie's signature before the end of the week. Nathalie looked at the document. Then she looked up. Why now? The woman said it was related to a new investment round. Timing requirements. She was sorry for the inconvenience. Nathalie looked down at Rosalie, asleep against her chest. She looked at the document. She asked for 48 hours to have her own lawyer review it. The woman nodded, collected the document without pushing back and left. Elliot came back into the room 20 minutes later. He didn't ask what the woman had wanted. He sat down, looked at his phone and said he'd found a great night nurse if she wanted one. She did not tell him what she had noticed. She just watched. The document went to her lawyer the next morning. A former colleague named Grant Murray, now a senior partner at a firm in downtown Edmonton. He called her 4 hours later. Nathalie, a pause. Where are you? Still at the hospital, she said. Why? Can you talk? Privately? She asked her mother, who had driven up from Winnipeg to help, to take Rosalie for a walk down the hall. Then she sat on the edge of the hospital bed in the January light coming through the window and listened to Grant explain what the document actually said. It was, on the surface, a shareholder restructuring. But embedded in the language was a clause that would, if signed, sever her from any equity stake she held in Harding Development through their marriage, reframing it as a spousal gift rather than a joint contribution. It was the kind of language that only mattered if the marriage ended. It was the kind of language someone had been careful about. She sat with that for a while. Don't sign it, Grant said. Do you want me to? Not yet, she said. I just need to think. She sat there after she hung up, in the pale Edmonton light, listening to the sound of the corridor outside, a cart going past, a nurse saying something to another nurse, a baby crying somewhere further down the hall. She did not cry, she thought very carefully about what she knew and what she didn't know and what came next. 11 months she had kept the folder. It started with small things, notes really, a paper trail she had always kept out of professional habit, the same way she kept records for every deal the company had ever done, emails she printed and filed, the spreadsheet she had originally built in 2016 to track cash flow projections, the one that still had her personal account in the header, from when she had been running the numbers on her own laptop before they had an office, documents that showed her fingerprints on the architecture of the company, in ways that no restructuring language could simply erase. She had started keeping them in a folder. Not because she expected to need them, but because she was an accountant, and keeping documentation was the same as breathing. She didn't let herself think too hard about why the habit had started to feel urgent. She just filed things away. After the conversation with Grant, she understood what she had been doing. She spent the rest of her maternity leave working, quietly, in ways that Elliot didn't see. She met twice more with Grant. She compiled records. She spoke with a financial advisor she had used independently since her mid-20s. A woman named Adrienne who had always treated Nathalie's money and Elliot's money as separate things even when Nathalie had sometimes wished they wouldn't. Adrienne was not surprised by anything Nathalie told her. She said carefully, "I've been wondering when you'd call." Nathalie went back to work at her accounting firm when Rosalie was 4 months old. She returned to her own career, her own clients, her own billable hours, her own name on her own work, with a kind of focus that surprised even her. She did not bring the folder to work. She left it in the locked drawer of her desk at home. She did not discuss any of it with Elliot. She watched. She watched Corinne become a fixture, not just in the office, but in the periphery of their social life. Dinner invitations that included Corinne on the list. Industry events where Corinne stood just slightly too close to the edge of the picture frame. She watched Elliot talk about the company at parties in a way that sounded increasingly like a solo narrative. The early years compressed into a clean story about his instincts and his drive, and his willingness to take risks. She heard him tell the story of the company's first deal. The property near Riverbend, the one she had underwritten herself, and spent 3 weeks losing sleep over the financing, as a story about his gut feeling about the neighborhood. She heard that story at a dinner party in March, 11 months after the hospital. She smiled and nodded and refilled her glass and looked at the middle distance in the way she had gotten very good at. 2 weeks later she made 3 phone calls. One to Grant, one to Adrian, one to her mother. Then she booked a flight. She did not leave in anger. That was the part nobody would understand later. When the people who needed to understand it eventually did, she left in the same calm way she had always done the hard things, with a list and a timeline and a clear sense of what she was walking toward rather than away from. She found a furnished rental in Calgary. It was a 2-bedroom on the 16th floor of a building near Kensington, with a balcony that faced west and good light in the mornings. She paid 3 months up front. She had her own savings, always had, and they were enough. She told her mother first. Her mother was quiet on the phone for a long moment, and then she said, "Do you need me to come?" Nathalie said yes. Her mother was there in 2 days. She told her employer second. She requested a transfer to the firm's Calgary office, which had been discussed before and was approved within a week. Her reputation traveled ahead of her. She did not tell Elliot until the morning she left. She handed him a single envelope. Inside was a letter from Grant's firm, a formal separation notice, and a brief summary of the documentation she had assembled over the past 11 months. She said, standing in the front hallway with Rosalie on her hip and her coat already on, "There is nothing in that document you will want to argue with. If you do, Grant will walk you through it. I'd take a few days before you call him." Elliot looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He said her name. She opened the door. It was snowing lightly, the fine dry kind of snow that meant a cold, clear day was coming. Rosalie grabbed at the flakes falling near her face and laughed the surprised full-body laugh she had learned recently, the one that still caught Nathalie off guard every time. She buckled Rosalie into the car seat. She put her bag in the trunk. She got in the car. She did not look back at the house. The divorce proceedings were not short, but they were not what Elliot had perhaps hoped they would be either. Grant was thorough. The documentation Nathalie had compiled went back years, and it was comprehensive in the way that only a trained accountant who has spent a decade looking at her own paper trail can be comprehensive. The equity question was contested for a while, then it was not. Karine, it turned out, left Harding Development 8 months after Nathalie did. She started her own firm. This was not something Nathalie had engineered. She simply noted it the way she noted other things, carefully, without satisfaction but also without surprise. Elliot called in the early months more than she expected. She took some of the calls. She was civil. She was not warm. She answered the questions that were about Rosalie and let the rest of the calls go to voicemail. There was one message a few months in where she could hear him trying to articulate something that didn't have a shape yet. Some version of "I didn't see it," some version of "I didn't understand." She listened to it twice. Then she deleted it. She was not unmoved. She had loved him, genuinely, for a long time. But there is a difference between love and the habit of being invisible inside it. And she had spent too many years confusing the two. Calgary suited her. She hadn't expected it to, had half expected to miss Edmonton in a homesick way that would make the whole thing feel like a mistake. But the city opened up in front of her like a new project she hadn't known she needed. She took on clients she chose, not ones assigned to her. She began consulting on the side for 2 small development firms. Real work, the kind she was good at, the kind where her name appeared in the room at the beginning rather than at the end. Her mother stayed for 6 weeks. She taught Rosalie to clap her hands and fed everyone well, and read her novel in the evenings on the balcony while Nathalie put Rosalie to bed. When she left, she hugged Nathalie for a long time at the departure's door and see, "She's going to know exactly who you are." Nathalie didn't trust herself to answer. She just nodded. She made friends slowly, in the way people make friends in their 30s when they're not in a hurry about it. A neighbor named Tamsin who had a daughter a few months older than Rosalie, and a dry sense of humor that Nathalie appreciated. A colleague at the Calgary office, a man named Bernard who had worked in development finance for 15 years, and who recognized, in their first meeting, that Nathalie knew things he didn't, and treated her accordingly. She went to Riverview Park on Sunday mornings with the stroller and a coffee, and she stood by the river and let herself be, without an agenda. It wasn't easy. There were evenings when Rosalie was asleep and the apartment was quiet, and the quiet was the wrong kind. The kind that pressed, and Nathalie would sit at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and look at nothing for a while. She didn't try to outrun those evenings. She just sat in them until they passed, which they always did, with the patient inevitability of Canadian winters turning into spring. Harding Development merged with a Calgary firm the following year. It was announced in a press release that described Elliot as the founder and architect of a 10-year real estate success story. She read the press release once. She noticed what was missing from it. She closed the tab. 3 weeks later, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, an Alberta area code. She almost didn't answer. It was from a journalist at a business publication who was writing a profile on the consolidation of mid-market real estate development firms in the Prairie provinces. She had been given Nathalie's name by 2 separate sources in the industry who described her as, and he read this aloud, the person who actually understood how those early Harding deals worked. She was quiet for a moment. "I'd be happy to speak with you," she said. She did not say anything she couldn't stand behind. She was careful. She was specific. She talked about the financial modeling, the risk analysis, the kinds of decisions that get made at 11 at night at a kitchen table when nobody is watching. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. The facts, arranged in the right order, had always been enough. The article ran 6 weeks later. Her name appeared in it 3 times. The first time as a source. The second time in a quote about the methodology behind the company's early portfolio decisions. The third time in a sidebar that described her current independent consulting work and the 2 development projects in Calgary she was advising on. She read it at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning, while Rosalie ate toast and pulled at the hem of the tablecloth. She read it through once. Then she set her phone down and watched her daughter for a while. The focused, serious way Rosalie approached the toast, the way she held it with both hands like it was something important, and she felt something settle quietly inside her, the way ice settles when it's finally done cracking. The balcony faced west, and on clear evenings the light came in long and gold across the floor of the apartment. Nathalie would sometimes stand there after Rosalie was in bed, a mug of something warm in both hands, watching the city arrange itself against the darkening sky. The mountains were out there, past the edge of the city, invisible most of the time but present. You knew they were there, even when you couldn't see them. She had been the one who made things work for a long time. The one who asked the hard questions the night before so no one else had to face them in the room. The one whose name never appeared in the room at the beginning. She had told herself that was enough, that it didn't matter, that the work was what mattered, and some of that had been true. The work did matter. She did know how to do it. But she also knew, standing on the balcony with the cold, clean air off the Bow River, that mattering quietly is not the same as not mattering. That erasing yourself to hold something together is not the same as generosity. That there is a version of loving someone where you pour so much of yourself into their becoming that you forget you were also supposed to become. She was becoming now, slowly, in the way that real things grow. Rosalie would turn 2 in January. She was walking, had been walking since just before her first birthday, with the determined forward lean of someone who has somewhere important to be. She said words now, not many but deliberate ones. More. Down, Mama. She had her grandmother's eyes and, Nathalie suspected, her grandmother's stubbornness and something else besides. Something that was just Rosalie, particular and irreducible. The light faded. The mountains were out there in the dark. Nathalie went inside, washed her mug, turned off the kitchen light, and checked on her daughter, the soft breath, the small fist curled near her chin, and then went to bed and slept without difficulty, the way people sleep when they have finally stopped waiting for something and started, instead, to simply be somewhere.